Margaery Tyrell sat in the dimly lit cell beneath the September of Baelor, trying to gather every ounce of poise she had left. The cold stone walls pressed in around her, and she could sense the mustiness of the air that circulated through this subterranean warren. Her once elegant dress, a luxurious fabric of Tyrell green, had gone dull with dirt and sweat, though she did her best to remain proud. At times, in the flickering candlelight, she thought of her grandmother's voice, always urging her to use her wits and keep up appearances. Now, more than ever, she would need both cunning and composure. She had no idea how many days had passed since she was thrown into the cell by order of the High Sparrow. Time felt like a half-remembered notion, shifting in the gloom. Yet she refused to be broken. When her wrists ached from the shackles, she straightened her posture and tried to cultivate that graciousness that had made her beloved by the people. Her people, the small folk of King's Landing, who had pinned their hopes on her. She comforted herself by imagining how they might still speak her name in respectful tones. Even if the faith militant had seized her, even if she was publicly humiliated and locked in these depths, her mind was her own, and she would keep it sharp. There was a persistent drip of water somewhere in the corridor. Whenever her cell door opened, letting in a sliver of torchlight, she would see faith militant men stepping down the hall, their expressions cold, the 7 pointed stars on their foreheads glinting like fresh scars. Everything was so far from the bright days she'd once enjoyed, walking the gardens with her ladies, or planning the next festival to enthrall the populace. Imprisonment eroded all sense of freedom, and a creeping suspicion festered in her mind. If the faith militant could commit such injustices against her and her brother, could they do worse? Could they orchestrate further cruelty in the name of their beliefs? Yet tonight, for reasons she could not fully articulate, she sensed something had shifted. Margaery could almost smell a whiff of tension in the air, even more pungent than the constant stone and mildew odor. This was different. It was almost as if the building itself braced for a cataclysm. The footsteps echoing above seemed to multiply, even though her own corridor remained still. She heard new voices, murmurings. Something was happening in King's Landing. That night, she realized, was the night before her trial. The High Sparrow had made that painfully clear. She was to be walked to the great September of Baelor at sunrise, paraded before the faith, with her brother's fate hanging in the balance. Margaery had lain awake on the straw pallet thinking of how she might leverage her intelligence to sway the High Sparrow once more. She was not blind to the precarious position of her family. Mace Tyrell might still be in the city, but so far he had proven ineffectual at securing her and Loras's release. Her grandmother, Olenna, might have returned to Highgarden to marshal the broader resources of House Tyrell. Margaery prayed for it in her quiet moments. Still, she had no illusions about the harrowing day to come. When the cell door opened with a clang, startling her from her ruminations, she expected to see one of the Septas with a bowl of water. But it was not a Septa. A robed acolyte stepped in, carrying only a small candle. His hood was drawn so low she could not see his face. He paused a moment to glance over his shoulder, ensuring they were alone in the corridor, then eased the door shut behind him. Margaery lifted her chin. "Who are you?" she asked calmly, though her pulse quickened. She had to speak softly to avoid alerting the faith militant who might be roaming close by. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he fumbled with something beneath his robe. Another moment passed, and the acolyte looked up just enough that she could see a portion of his face. He was a young man, perhaps only a few years older than her brother Loras, and he held a ring of keys in his right hand. He raised one finger to his lips. "A friend," he finally whispered, stepping forward to press the ring of keys into her palm. "I have been following the High Sparrow's doings for months, my lady. This has gone too far." She surveyed the ring, uncertain if she should allow herself to hope. "How did you come by these?" Her heart was pounding, but her tone remained carefully controlled, measured. "If you're discovered helping me." "Shoo," he said, stepping back. "All that matters is your escape from this place. They will kill you tomorrow or make an example of you and your brother. It has gone beyond a mere trial now. Cersei Lannister's presence is no longer required. Her own trial has been postponed." Something is off. There are rumors about the Queen Mother and about the High Sparrow. Many of the Faith militant will be gathering at dawn to ensure you cannot flee. But, my lady, there are more dangerous whispers. One's about wildfire and destruction. Margaery's eyes widened. Wildfire. The word invoked images of emerald flames that could melt flesh and stone. It was a relic of her knowledge gleaned from stories about the Mad King Ares, how he'd hidden caches of wildfire beneath the city. She'd heard the rumors, as many at court had. Was there some plan to deploy wildfire now? Who would orchestrate such madness? Surely the Faith would not do it. They had no interest in King's Landing burning, not if they hoped to retain power. So if not them, then who? Cersei, she said quietly, feeling her stomach twist with dread. She would burn the city if it meant regaining control. Still clutching the keys, Margaery moved closer to the young man. These rumors? Can you be more specific? He hesitated, glancing at the corridor. Only the quiet drip of water and the occasional scurry of rats provided a backdrop. My father was once a pyromancer's assistant, the acolyte whispered. He told me tales of hidden caches left throughout the city, but the largest was rumored to be below the Great September of Baelor itself. I overheard one of the faith confessors say that the Queen Mother seemed all too calm about the day's events, as if she had no fear of not attending her own trial. He found it strange enough to mention, and I suspected the worst. I do not know if the High Sparrow is aware. He is so convinced of his righteous cause that he might be blind to the Queen Mother's plot. If these rumors are true, and if none of you are permitted to leave the September before dawn, everyone inside might be in mortal peril. Margaery felt the blood drain from her face. That explained the prickle of unease she had sensed in the air tonight. She had known that Cersei Lannister was cunning, even ruthless, but to kill so many at once? To risk the lives of all in the September, from the faith militant to innocent bystanders who might be present for the trial, was an unspeakable evil. And if Margaery did not act, House Tyrell would likely be destroyed in the blow, for Loras was set to appear alongside her, and Mace Tyrell might well be in attendance, too. Even the small folk whom she had tried so hard to protect, the ones who might gather to witness the event, could be torn asunder. She had to do something. She closed her hand tight around the keys. How many men guard these corridors tonight? 3 in this passage, he said quickly. 4 more in the next. The High Sparrow gave explicit instructions that you and Ser Loras be guarded with all diligence. He means to put you on trial at dawn to force confessions, you see. He has taken away your brother's pride, and he wants to do the same to you. Margaery pressed her lips together, forcing back a shudder. She could only imagine what Loras had endured in his cell, stripped of dignity and battered in ways that left him a mere ghost of the Knight of Flowers he had once been. Anger roiled in her mind. She set her jaw, vowing that her brother would not die in that cursed Great September. I must see Loras, she said. I will not leave him behind. They keep him in the cell at the end of this corridor, up 1 flight of stairs, said the young acolyte. I can show you the way, but we must move carefully. If we are caught, that is the end for us all. Margaery nodded. First, we must learn if the High Sparrow truly knows anything of Cersei's plot, she said. He might be an enemy, but if he is to die unwittingly, and I can prevent it by exposing Cersei's plan, I must try. The destruction of the September would not only kill the faith, it would kill my family and countless innocents. The acolyte lowered his voice to the barest whisper. Be careful, my lady. The High Sparrow believes wholeheartedly in your guilt, and Cersei has manipulated him. If you approach him carelessly, he may think you speak of wildfire as a desperate lie. He might see it as a cunning ploy and have you silenced. Margaery's brows drew together in deep thought. The risk was obvious, yet she couldn't simply run off into the night. She had no illusions that the Lannister guards or the faith militant would let her escape the city freely. Nor did she trust that the Tyrell forces, under her father's uncertain leadership, could mount a swift rescue. She needed allies, or at least enough time to warn key individuals who might help. I cannot do this alone, she said. How long before dawn? Only a few hours, the acolyte replied. We must hurry. Margaery nodded, adjusting the folds of her soiled dress to move more easily. There was a flutter in her chest that might have been fear, or was it adrenaline? She decided she would not cower in the shadows while Cersei orchestrated a massive slaughter. She would not allow the proud name of Tyrell to be annihilated. Then let us go, she murmured, and moved toward the door. The acolyte took hold of the torch in the corridor and led her out. The flicker of flame cast wavering shapes upon the stone walls. Margaery's legs almost buckled with relief at being freed from that cramped, dark cell. Even the corridor felt like a wide-open plain by comparison. Her wrists were free now, though they bore the marks of the shackles. She winced, glancing at the ring of keys in her hand, identifying the one that might unlock Loras's cell. She clutched it tight. Loras. She would save him or die trying. They walked in silence, only the hush of their footsteps marking their progress. Once, they heard the echo of armed men talking in low tones. Margaery felt her heart leap as they pressed themselves against the wall. The acolyte waited until the footsteps receded, then beckoned her forward again. The corridors branched, twisted, and led them deeper into the labyrinth beneath the city's grandest place of worship. At last, they arrived at a broader passage where two faith militants stood guard outside a cell door. The men were tall, each brandishing a cudgel decorated with a 7-pointed star. From a vantage point around the corner, Margaery observed them in the torchlight. She recognized neither guard's face. She took a controlled breath. She could attempt cunning rather than brute force. She was no warrior, and the acolyte with her certainly did not appear trained in combat. But how? The acolyte pressed close to her ear. I can distract them. You have the keys. She nodded, reviewing the plan she was quickly forming in her mind. Lure them down that corridor, she whispered back, pointing to a narrow hallway. I'll slip in, free Loras, and then we'll see how to proceed. The acolyte looked terrified but also resolved. He began walking toward the guards, feigning a calm expression. As he approached, Margaery could hear him say something about an urgent summons from the High Sparrow, instructing them that a special prayer was required for Ser Loras's soul. The guards, looking suspicious, demanded proof. Margaery tensed, waiting for the moment to slip past. When one of them took a step forward to examine the young acolyte more closely, Margaery seized the opportunity. She padded silently across the corridor, staying close to the wall. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she held her breath and pressed onward. Both men had turned to the acolyte, so neither saw her. She managed to make it to the door of Loras's cell without detection. She chose the correct key from the ring and inserted it into the lock, praying silently that it would not squeak. There was a small click, and the heavy wooden door gave way. She slipped inside and shut the door. The cell was cramped, lit by only a sputtering candle in the corner. There, curled on a thin pallet, was Loras Tyrell, barely recognizable from the proud knight of flowers she remembered. He looked thinner, weaker, his head shaved in patches and bruises marking his flesh. Her heart clenched at the sight of him. Loras, she whispered, bending down and placing a hand on his shoulder. He didn't stir. Loras, she repeated a little louder. He blinked up at her, confusion in his eyes, then recognition. She tried to keep her voice gentle. We're getting out of here. He stirred, letting out a low groan. Margaery, you can't be here. They'll. She pressed a finger to his lips. They won't catch us if we hurry. Come on. Can you stand? Gently, she helped him to his feet. He wobbled, leaning heavily on her. The sight of him so enfeebled ignited fresh fury in her chest. Anger at the High Sparrow, anger at Cersei for orchestrating all these events, anger at the faith militant for brutalizing him. But there was no time to dwell on that. She needed to keep him moving. He shuddered, his gaze distant. I can barely walk. I haven't eaten in, I don't even know how long. I'll help you, she promised, wrapping an arm around his waist. She guided him toward the door, pushing it open enough to peek outside. The corridor was empty. Relief flooded her, though she worried about what might have happened to the acolyte. Perhaps he had led the guards away successfully. She forced herself to swallow her dread and pressed onward. Getting Loras to safety mattered more than anything else. They would find the acolyte if they could. Guiding Loras down the passage, she recalled the route she had taken. She tried to remain steady, ignoring the throbbing in her wrists and shoulders. Loras breathed heavily, each step apparently taxing him more than the last. She offered quiet encouragement, a murmur here and there. Their footfalls were muffled on the worn stone floor. Then, from somewhere behind them, voices rang out. She froze, pressing Loras and herself into a dark alcove. Torchlight flickered on the walls, and a voice barked, "Spread out! Find them!" That had to be the Faith militant. They had discovered the ruse. Margaery drew a trembling breath, glancing around the corridor. There was a small wooden door at the end, used by septas or novices for unknown tasks, but it could serve as a hiding place, anything to avoid direct confrontation. She steered Loras toward that door. It was locked. She fumbled with the ring of keys, trying them one by one while her heart pounded in her ears. With each passing second, the voices drew nearer. Her shaking hands managed to find the correct key. She turned it, and the door opened with a protesting groan. They slipped through, shutting it behind them as quietly as they could. She found a latch to secure it from the inside and fastened it. The room was a cramped storeroom of sorts, filled with barrels of dried goods and old vestments. A single, dusty lantern hung from the ceiling. Margaery eased Loras to the ground behind a large barrel. When he leaned his head back against the cool stone, she carefully lowered the lantern's wick so that they would not be visible through any cracks in the door. "Rest a moment," she whispered, pressing her hand to his cheek. "We'll find a way out soon." He nodded weakly. The flicker of the lantern cast shadows across his gaunt face, hollowed from his ordeal. Margaery fought the urge to weep. It would accomplish nothing and only undermine their composure. Instead, she clenched her jaw and listened for any sign that the guards were passing by. She heard footsteps, muffled voices, more curses. Someone tried the door. She held her breath as the latch rattled once, then stilled. After a tense few heartbeats, the footsteps receded. She exhaled, meeting Loras's eyes. He managed a feeble attempt at a reassuring smile, but she could see the haunted look within him. "They broke me," he muttered almost to himself. "Everything I told them everything. It's all gone." She ran her fingers gently through his hair. "They haven't broken you fully, Loras. You're still a Tyrell, still my brother. We will stand together." She paused, steeling herself. "Listen, something terrible is about to happen. I've heard rumor that Cersei intends to destroy the Great September with wildfire." He stared at her in disbelief, and she saw an echo of the old Loras flash in his eyes, the man who could be counted on for bravery and cunning when needed. She would kill everyone inside. The Faith, the royal court, the Tyrells, the small folk who come to watch. She would kill them all? Margaery's hands tightened in her lap. Yes, she must have caches hidden below. "I do not believe the High Sparrow knows. This is set to happen at dawn, at our trial, if not sooner." Her voice caught at the prospect of such destruction. She thought of her father, who had tried to maneuver politically, but lacked the cunning to see the serpent in Cersei. She thought of her grandmother, who might have been forced to leave the city or had her influence curbed. Still, if Margaery could warn enough people, perhaps they could evacuate in time. But how? "We have to get out. Warn as many as we can," said Loras, forcing a measure of steadiness into his voice. "We have to stop this madness." She nodded. "Yes, but first, we need a place to hide until we can slip from these catacombs undetected. Then we must find the High Sparrow, or better yet, someone with enough authority to gather the people and evacuate them from the September. If we can't get them to believe us, we still have to try. I will not leave innocents to be slaughtered." Outside, footsteps pattered again, accompanied by the low rumble of men's voices. Margaery tensed. Loras tried to shift his weight, stifling a groan of pain from his battered muscles. She placed a hand on his shoulder, cautioning silence. Another voice spoke, more distant, and she thought she recognized it. She couldn't hear what was being said, but it was certainly authoritative in tone. Perhaps it was one of the lead members of the faith. When the sounds receded, Margaery finally turned the lantern's wick up slightly, peering around at the room's interior. There was a worn tapestry in the corner, partially covering the wall. To Margaery's surprise, part of the wall behind it seemed to curve away, as if a hidden alcove or corridor might lie there. She stood carefully, drawing the tapestry aside. Yes, sure enough, there was an archway leading to a narrow passage that vanished into darkness. She helped Loras to his feet again. "We can't stay here. They'll search every storeroom eventually," she reasoned softly. "Let's see where this leads. Keep hold of me." Together, they stepped through the archway, leaving the storeroom behind. The smell was different here, older, less traveled. Cobwebs brushed Margaery's arms, causing her to shiver. She tried not to think of the spider webs draping across her hair. The space was narrow enough that they had to move single file, Margaery in front, Loras clinging to her shoulder. She wondered how far these hidden passages went. Had they been constructed centuries ago under the Targaryen kings? Perhaps they led to a deserted portion of the catacombs, one that might emerge in some unsuspected corner of King's Landing. Her mind raced. How could she best spread word of Cersei's plan? Even if she managed to escape this labyrinth, how would she get to the palace or to the streets to warn the small folk? How long would it take the faith militant to comb the city for her? And above all, how much time remained until dawn? She forged onward. The passage wound left, then right, slanting downward. The ground was slick with condensation, forcing her to brace against the wall. She felt a faint draft coming from ahead, air from some unknown exit, hopefully. She could hear Loras's labored breathing behind her. She tried to move slowly enough that he could keep pace. Suddenly, she saw the glow of torchlight flickering on the stone. Her first thought was that guards might already be down here, but as she peered around a bend, she glimpsed the acolyte from before. He knelt on the ground, a torch set beside him. His robes were torn, and he was breathing heavily, one arm pressed to his side. Margaery felt a rush of relief mingled with concern. She approached him cautiously. "You're hurt," she said, voice low. "What happened?" He raised his head, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "They caught me, cornered me when I tried to lead them away. One of them struck me with a cudgel, but I managed to break free and slip down here." He winced, shifting to put his back against the wall. "I've been hiding, praying you would find me." Margaery kneeled beside him, briefly checking his injury. His robes were wet with blood where the cudgel had impacted, but it seemed more like a nasty bruise and surface cut than a mortal wound. She tore a strip of her dress's hem and pressed it to the wound to stanch the bleeding. She found herself remembering how she had once nurtured injured animals in the gardens of Highgarden, bandaging them with scraps of cloth. Now she was doing the same for a kindly stranger who had risked his life to help her. "Thank you," the acolyte murmured. Then he noticed Loras, who was leaning against the passage wall. "Ser Loras, you're alive. That's good." Loras managed a faint nod. "Yes, and I owe you my thanks, too." He drew a shaking breath. "We have to get out of here. Do you know if there's a way out through these passages?" The acolyte gazed down the dark corridor. "I believe so. I recall that some novices mentioned old catacomb exits that lead to alleyways behind the September. If we keep following this path, we might reach a hidden door near the Street of Silk or perhaps an old courtyard that used to belong to a lesser September. It's rarely used now." Relief washed through Margaery. "Then lead us, please." She helped him to his feet, supporting him as well as she could. Now she had 2 wounded men leaning on her, but they would have to endure. They had to warn someone of the impending disaster. The acolyte took up his torch, pressing his hand to his side with a wince, and began leading them deeper along the corridor. It was clear his steps were unsteady, but with the flickering light, he managed to navigate the winding path. Margaery said nothing as they walked. Her mind churned with half-formed plans. If she could reach the Red Keep, perhaps she might find Kevan Lannister or Grand Maester Pycelle. Though she distrusted them, They might at least realize the magnitude of a wildfire attack. Or maybe she could find a way to gather the small folk in the streets, stirring a clamor that would draw the attention of the Kingsguard. She was not sure. She only knew she had to try. After several minutes of cautious progress, the corridor sloped upward. They found themselves facing a wooden door reinforced with iron bands. The acolyte tested the latch, locked. Margaery pressed her ear to the wood. She heard nothing beyond. Searching through the ring of keys, she finally found one that fit. With a low creak, the door swung open, revealing a cramped courtyard beneath the stars. Fresh air washed over them, and Margaery almost sobbed with relief. It was a moonless night, the sky a dome of black. In the darkness, she could just make out the outlines of the high walls around them. This courtyard must have belonged to some minor building abutting the September's foundation. There was a narrow passage leading out, lit only by the faint glow of distant street lanterns. They slipped out, scanning the deserted space. Margaery glimpsed a neglected statue to the maiden, its features worn by time. The courtyard was silent save for the faint hum of the city beyond. King's Landing never truly slept, so the hush was eerie. "Where are we?" Loras asked, his voice raw. The acolyte glanced around, trying to find some familiar landmark. "If I recall correctly, the Street of Sisters is just beyond that alley. That means we're behind the September complex. If we follow the alley, we'll come out near the gate that leads toward Visenyaz Hill. From there, it's a short walk to the Red Keep." Margaery nodded. "Let's hurry. There's no time to waste." She slipped one arm around Loras to help steady him, and the acolyte leaned on a broken bit of wall. They moved toward the narrow alley, each step measured. The acolyte doused the torch to avoid drawing attention, plunging them into near-total darkness. A pang of fear twisted in Margaery's gut at the thought of running into city guards or the faith militant, but she pressed on. She had no illusions that dawn was more than a few hours away, and she had to act before it was too late. At length, the alley opened onto a slightly wider street. Here they saw a couple of flickering lanterns mounted on bracketed poles. The city smelled of refuse and stale wine, as King's Landing often did, but Margaery found it almost comforting. She inhaled carefully and cast her gaze about. Most windows were shuttered at this hour, but they could hear distant revelry from some taverns still open near the Street of Flower. "Follow me," the acolyte whispered, edging around a corner. The street was empty except for a stray cat, which hissed and then darted away. They passed darkened shops and shuttered stalls, moving as swiftly as Loras and the acolyte's injuries would allow. At last, they came within sight of the looming silhouette of the Red Keep perched on its rocky promontory. The fortress was lit by a smattering of torches, though fewer than usual at this hour. Margaery pressed her lips together, trying to figure out the best way to gain entrance. The main gates were guarded, and they might not believe her story or might turn them over to the faith. Alternatively, she could risk seeking out the Tyrell man-at-arms who might still be camped outside the city walls. But that would take time. Meanwhile, the High Sparrow and the Faith were preparing for dawn. Cersei's plan had to be exposed quickly. She made her decision. "I know of a sally port near the southeast tower," she said quietly. "I recall it from the days when I lived in the keep. If we can get inside that way, we may find a friendly face. Perhaps Ser Jaime's loyal men are about. Though the Queen Mother's brother, Jaime, might be away with the army, some of his men might still be around the keep. Or we might find a member of the Kingsguard who is not enthralled to Cersei." Her tone held a note of forced confidence, as she had no real idea who was left in the keep. She only knew that the main gate was too dangerous. They would likely be stopped, questioned, and dragged off by either the Lannisters or the Faith militant. With no time left, she led them down a winding route along the side of the hill, watching her footing on the uneven cobblestones. Eventually, they reached a moss-covered wall overshadowed by brambles. If her memory served, a small iron gate was hidden there. They ventured closer, and she could see a faint line where the iron gate was set. Margaery tested it. Locked, of course. She tried several keys from the ring again, teeth chattering from nerves and the night air. Finally, the gate clicked open. She pushed it inward, and the three of them squeezed through into a cramped corridor built into the outer walls of the keep. Within, they found a spiral stair leading upward. Margaery beckoned them along. The acolyte was breathing more shallowly now, and Loras muttered under his breath, obviously in pain. But they kept ascending, using the walls for support until they emerged onto a landing that was dimly illuminated by a torch bracketed on the wall. The corridor beyond was deserted, the stone floors polished. Margaery recognized it as a servant's passage near the Queen's ballroom. "Let's head that way," she whispered, pointing toward a discreet wooden door. "We might find Pycelle's chambers or Qyburn's old workshop, though I hesitate to trust either. We just need someone with enough authority to gather the court." Loras managed to keep his voice low. "Qyburn is as dangerous as Cersei. We can't trust him. But Pycelle might at least be forced to listen." The acolyte interjected. "What about Ser Kevan Lannister, Lord Regent? If we can get to him, he might believe us. He is known to be more level-headed than Cersei." Margaery nodded, grateful for the suggestion. "Yes, Kevan might not be easily manipulated. Let's try for his chambers." She tried to recall their location. If memory served, Kevan Lannister had taken up a suite that was once used by Tywin Lannister. She led them deeper into the keep, the hush of the late hour pressing around them. Occasionally, they heard the distant footsteps of guards, but managed to avoid direct confrontation by ducking behind pillars or slipping into side passages. At last, they found themselves near the hallway leading to the old hand's chambers. Margaery gently eased open a door to peer inside. Two guards stood at attention, wearing the Lannister crimson and gold. She withdrew before they could spot her. Her mind raced. Perhaps she could speak to them directly, but it was a gamble. Would they let her pass, or would they arrest her on sight? Before she could decide on a course of action, the door opened from within, and Kevan Lannister himself stepped out, still fully dressed despite the hour. His expression was stern, but his posture spoke of urgency. He was speaking quietly with another man, a scribe or steward, perhaps. Margaery took her chance, stepping into the hallway, hands raised to show she was unarmed. Kevan jolted at the sight of her, and the guards immediately drew their weapons, stepping forward with menacing scowls. "My lord," Margaery said quickly, voice trembling with the tension of the moment. "Please, I mean no harm. I come only with a warning. You must listen." Kevan recognized her, of course, but suspicion blazed in his eyes. "Lady Margaery? How did you get here? You are supposed to be in the custody of the faith." The guards advanced. Margaery exhaled and tried to maintain composure. "We escaped," she said, "and we have reason, dire reason, to believe that the Queen Mother is about to unleash wildfire beneath the great September of Baelor at dawn. If the faith holds the trial as intended, all who attend will be killed." Kevan's eyes narrowed sharply. "Wildfire? You must understand how grave an accusation that is." Behind Margaery, Loras and the acolyte emerged, supporting each other. Kevan's gaze flicked over them, taking in Loras's battered condition and the acolyte's bloodied robe. Margaery suspected Kevan Lannister to be a man of reason, though loyalty to Cersei might blind him. Still, she had to try. "Please, my lord," she continued, "I do not ask you to act solely on my word. You know your niece is cunning. Consider, why has she refused to attend her trial? Why is she so certain that no harm will befall her for her absence? There must be a plan in place. She intends to destroy the September. She will kill the faith, yes, but also everyone else. My father, my brother, high lords, small folk, whomever is inside." Kevan inhaled, clearly rattled. The steward behind him swallowed hard. The guards shifted uneasily. At last, Kevan glanced over his shoulder, then back at Margaery. "Let them in," he said quietly to the guards. "We should speak privately." The guards hesitated, but Kevan was the Lord Regent, so they obeyed. The group slipped into Kevan's chambers, a stately room lined with heavy drapes and a large table piled with papers. Margaery noticed maps of the city, correspondence from lords, and half-finished documents. Kevan gestured for the guards to stand watch at the door while he turned to face Margaery. The steward lingered nearby, looking anxious. "Tell me everything," Kevan said. Margaery did so, explaining as succinctly as possible her imprisonment, her conversation with the acolyte, the rumors of hidden wildfire caches, the infiltration by the faith militant. Loras confirmed what little he could. The acolyte, for his part, spoke with quiet conviction, telling Kevan Lannister how he had overheard references to the old Mad King's stashes. The more they spoke, the deeper Kevan's frown became. "Cersei," he muttered, pacing across the chamber. "She has always been cunning, but even she would not stoop to mass murder on this scale. Would she?" He paused, as if recalling how Cersei had once turned to Qyburn's dark arts. Perhaps he remembered the stories of the Mad King. He shook his head, looking grim. "If there's even a chance this is true, we cannot risk it. Lord Mace Tyrell, the Faith, and half the city's notable persons are expected at dawn. I must act." He turned to the steward. "Rouse the men quietly. We will not raise an alarm that might alert Cersei. I want the gold cloaks called to the Red Keep. Send word to the Pyromancer's Guild. Force them to confirm or deny whether wildfire has been accessed. We will need their expertise in neutralizing it if it is indeed in place." The steward nodded, scurrying off to carry out Kevan's orders. Margaery breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, someone in power was taking the threat seriously. Kevan looked back at her, expression grave. "Lady Margaery, I trust you understand that helping you could bring me into conflict with both the Faith and the Queen Mother." She nodded. "I do, my lord. But if we do nothing, countless lives will be lost, including many you care about. Even your son, Lancel, is among the Faith, is he not?" Kevan's lips tightened. "Yes," he murmured. "Yes, he is." He took a moment to let that sink in, then lifted his head. "Very well. We will do what we must. Ser Loras needs a maester's attention. We shall see he is cared for. As for you, we will keep you under my guard for now. If the High Sparrow sees you roam freely, he will react with hostility." Margaery inclined her head. "Thank you. My only request is that you evacuate as many people as you can from the September before dawn. Please do not let innocent people gather there, or at least ensure there is no large crowd. Prevent them from entering, if possible." Kevan nodded. He signaled one of the guards, who left to fetch a maester and pass on instructions. Loras sank into a chair, clearly drained beyond measure. The acolyte also lowered himself carefully onto a bench, pressing his hand to his wound. Margaery stood near Kevan, her mind still racing with possibilities. "If Cersei learns that you are taking these measures, she may detonate the wildfire prematurely," she warned. "We must tread carefully." Kevan's gaze hardened. "Agreed. I will send men to secure the September's perimeter, under pretense of maintaining order for the trial. We will not allow large crowds to form, nor will we permit the Faith to herd everyone inside. And if, in the process, we discover clear evidence of wildfire, we will remove it." Margaery swallowed, hoping it was not already too late. Dawn was fast approaching, but Kevan's authority, bolstered by the gold cloaks, might be enough to keep a lid on things until they had time to investigate. She prayed that Cersei had not already set a fuse. If only she could see Cersei's face, ask her what madness had seized her to contemplate such an atrocity. But Margaery knew that confrontation would be more dangerous than ever. They waited as the maester arrived and attended to Loras and the acolyte. Kevan's men slipped in and out of the chamber, delivering whispered reports. The guards confirmed that Cersei was still in her own quarters in Maegor's Holdfast, refusing visitors. The pyromancers claimed ignorance of any new request to remove wildfire from the vaults, but they admitted that the old caches from Aerys' day had never been fully accounted for. Kevan's face grew paler with each new detail. Tension ratcheted ever higher. In the final hours before dawn, Margaery dozed fitfully in a chair, her mind stirring with images of green fire devouring the city. She woke when Kevan gently touched her shoulder. "It is nearly first light," he said quietly. "We are going to the September." I want you to remain here in safety. Ser Loras is not in any condition to travel." She stood, smoothing her rumpled dress. "My lord, please be careful. If you confront Cersei—" Kevan shook his head. "I will attempt reason. I will question her calmly, if she arrives, or if she does not. My men are already securing the area around the September. We have begun quietly dispersing any crowds, claiming the trial is postponed." He let out a breath. "With luck, we might resolve this without bloodshed." Margaery opened her mouth, then closed it. She admired Kevan's calm under pressure. At last, she said, "Thank you for believing us." She felt no joy in being vindicated, only dread for the confrontation to come. Kevan departed with his retinue, leaving a small guard behind to watch over Margaery, Loras, and the acolyte. The hours crept by. She paced restlessly, ignoring the quiet protests of the guards stationed by the door. She peered out a window that overlooked the city, seeing the light of dawn creeping over the rooftops. She tried to glean any sign of trouble near the September, but from this vantage it was too distant to read the details. She imagined the great September rising like a proud monument on Visenya's hill, the 7 crystal towers glinting in the early sun. Beneath it all, if rumor was true, lay an ocean of wildfire that could be unleashed with a single spark. Each moment felt like an eternity. She whispered prayers, ironically, to the 7 for a city that had forsaken her. She prayed for the faith militant as well, ironically enough, that they might see reason and not force the confrontation that could trigger Cersei's plan. She prayed for Kevan Lannister, who, despite being aligned with the enemy, was at least rational enough to see the horror of mass slaughter. Above all, she prayed for the innocent men and women who would have arrived at the September for the trial, some out of duty, others out of curiosity, none suspecting the green apocalypse that might consume them. Time dragged on and the sun rose higher. The city awakened around them. Margaery caught glimpses of small folk heading about their business, some no doubt wondering why the gold cloaks were blocking certain streets. She heard the faint clang of bells from the city's other septs. The great September's own bells did not ring for the trial as expected, which she hoped was a sign that Kevan's men had seized control. At last, near mid-morning, the door to Kevan's chambers swung open. Margaery turned sharply, her heart hammering. One of Kevan's officers strode in, looking dusty and disheveled. There was no sign of Kevan himself. "My lady," the officer said, bowing, "I bring word from Lord Regent Kevan." Margaery's voice quivered with urgency. "Tell me, what happened? Is the September safe?" He cleared his throat. "The High Sparrow attempted to proceed with the trial at dawn, but we prevented the crowd from entering. We demanded that no one step inside until the city officials had arrived to ensure order. The faith militant protested, but we outnumbered them. Lord Kevan announced that the trial was postponed by royal decree. The High Sparrow was furious, but without the large crowd, he could not pressure the Tyrells or anyone else to enter." Margaery's breath caught. "And Cersei? Did she appear?" The officer shook his head. "No, my lady. She remains in the Red Keep, refusing to leave her chambers. But our men, quietly aided by the pyromancers, conducted a preliminary search beneath the September. They found barrels of wildfire in hidden vaults, a large number of them." His voice hushed, as though the words themselves were a curse. "We have disarmed what we can, though the pyromancers say it will take time to render them safe. Lord Kevan is overseeing it personally, ensuring there is no spark that could set them off. For now, there has been no explosion." Margaery's legs nearly gave out in relief. She placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady herself. "Thank the 7, she whispered. "So it's prevented. Does the High Sparrow realize what was beneath him?" The officer nodded grimly. "He does now. He refused to believe it at first, until we showed him physical proof. From what I understand, he stood in stunned silence, near the hidden vaults, and prayed for the gods to guide him. Whether this leads him to yield or to lash out, I cannot say, but for the moment all is calm, if tense." Margaery's racing heart began to settle. She felt a wave of gratitude, although she knew this was only the beginning. Cersei Lannister's plot had been exposed. But what next? What does Lord Kevan plan to do about Cersei? She asked. She all but committed treason, attempted mass murder. The officer shifted uncomfortably. That is for the King's Council to decide. King Tommen is still a boy, and his mother wields influence, even if this scheme is proven. Lord Kevan has asked Grand Maester Pycelle to call an immediate council meeting. We may see the Queen Mother face charges, depending on what the evidence shows. Margaery nodded slowly. She could imagine how cunningly Cersei would try to spin the events, perhaps feigning ignorance that the old caches existed. She might claim she never placed them there. That part of Margaery worried that, even now, Cersei might be forging a new plan. But for the moment, the city was safe from wildfire. That was the crucial victory. Seeing the officer's exhaustion, Margaery asked more quietly, "And the great September itself? Is it stable? No fear of accidental ignition?" "Not at the moment, my lady. The pyromancers have dampened the fuses, though they say it's a delicate process. They will remain until all is secure. Rest assured, you and your brother can breathe safely." Margaery exhaled, feeling tears prick her eyes. She thought of Loras, who lay in the next room under the maester's care. He would live and House Tyrell would survive the day. She thought of the small folk who would not be incinerated in an unholy blaze. All of it had come so close to ruin. If she had not discovered the plan, or if Kevan had refused to believe her, the city might have awakened to the darkest morning in its history. She offered the officer a grateful look. "Thank you," she said sincerely. He bowed once more and turned to leave, heading off to continue his duties. The guards resumed their station, leaving Margaery alone with her thoughts. She crossed into the adjoining room where the maester was tending to Loras and the acolyte. Both seemed to be resting, though Loras was stirring fitfully. She approached his bedside, gently placing a hand on his. He opened his eyes, blinking in the soft daylight. "It's done," she whispered. "We stopped it." He stared at her for a moment, then closed his eyes again in weary relief. She could sense that he wanted to say more, but the words failed him. Whatever ordeal he had endured would take time to heal, in more ways than one. Yet he was alive and the city stood. Margaery sank down in a chair by the window, exhaustion finally claiming her. She brushed the dirt from her dress in a futile attempt to restore some semblance of dignity. Her hair was tangled, her body ached, and her mind was fraught with the knowledge that this day's events would spark countless repercussions in the political tapestry of King's Landing. Still, she was alive, and so was Loras, and 1,000 others who might otherwise have perished. As the sun climbed higher, Margaery heard commotion in the corridors. No doubt word of the hidden wildfire was spreading among the nobility, the servants, and the small folk. She pictured the High Sparrow's face as he realized that he had almost unwittingly led the faithful into a massacre. She pictured Cersei's face as her plan unraveled. How furious, how desperate she must be now. Margaery did not relish that image, nor did she underestimate the danger. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope that King's Landing might not be swallowed by madness after all. Hours later, Kevan Lannister returned to his chambers, face drawn with fatigue and tension. He summoned Margaery to speak privately. She followed him into a smaller study, where a single window overlooked the bay. Outside, a light breeze rippled across the water, scattering reflections of the midday sun. Kevan stood behind a table strewn with reports and official seals. He motioned for Margaery to sit. "You have done this city a great service, my lady," he began gravely. "I have just come from a meeting with the High Sparrow and several others. We have confirmed that large amounts of wildfire were indeed placed beneath the September, with fuses prepared to ignite on command. The faith would have been annihilated, along with all in attendance. There is no question that the city was in grave peril." Margaery met his gaze. "And Cersei?" Kevan let out a long breath. "She denies all involvement, claiming ignorance of any such plan. However, Certain individuals in the keep have come forward stating that she made inquiries about the city's old caches of wildfire, that she had Qyburn investigate the old cellars. This, combined with your testimony, points strongly to her guilt. I suspect she means to brazen it out, using Tommen's position to shield her. But the king is shaken by this news. He refused to appear at the trial once we told him of the threat, though he was prepared to attend. She effectively saved Tommen's life by keeping him away, but that only underscores how she must have known the danger. Margaery felt a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. She will never admit it. She will claim it was all a vile rumor. Indeed, Kevan nodded. But the evidence is too strong for rumor alone. The pyromancers are under oath to reveal any misuse of wildfire, and they confirm that they provided none to anyone. This means Cersei must have used the old caches directly, which only a few people knew how to access. I believe we can force her to stand trial for this attempt. But it will be complicated. The High Sparrow still stands by his right to judge, though now he is reeling from the knowledge that he might have perished at her hands. For the moment, the city is in an uproar. The Tyrell armies will surely be outraged. Many in the court speak of this as a crime surpassing even regicide. Margaery swallowed, recalling how Cersei had once been forced to walk atonement for other sins. She will fight this tooth and nail, she said. If she is cornered, she may do something even more desperate. Kevan's expression turned grim. That is precisely what worries me. He paused, then continued. For now, I must keep the peace. I have posted guards at Maegor's holdfast, effectively confining her. I must also placate the faith militant by assuring them that justice will be served. Meanwhile, King Tommen is nearly catatonic with despair at the betrayal. He loves his mother, but this is unthinkable. Margaery lowered her eyes, feeling a pang of sympathy for Tommen. The boy was gentle, unsuited for the cruelty of court politics. This would shatter him. She also felt a bitter sense of vindication. If the Tyrell forces marched on King's Landing demanding retribution, it would not be undeserved. But she was not so foolish as to want open war. Too many innocents would suffer. At length, Kevan raised a hand to call her attention again. I have convinced the High Sparrow not to hold you or Ser Loras accountable for prior accusations, given the discovery that Cersei had conspired to murder you both. The faith militant has formally released you. However, they will demand a public statement, some form of repentance for the alleged crimes, just to save face. I suggest you comply, for the sake of keeping the peace. Once that is done, you will be free to return to your family. Margaery nodded. I will do as needed, my lord. My priority is for my brother to heal and my family to be safe. After that, I want no further trouble. I have had enough of King's Landing's intrigues. Kevan inclined his head. I understand. For what it is worth, Lady Margaery, I owe you a debt. You averted a catastrophe that might have plunged the realm into chaos. If there is anything I can do to assist you, you need but ask. She managed a small, tired smile. Your support is all I require right now. My grandmother will surely arrive soon with demands for justice. I only ask that you help her see reason if she threatens to do something rash. He allowed himself a faint, weary chuckle. Your grandmother, Lady Olenna, is not one to be trifled with. I will do my best to keep the peace. With that, he dismissed her, and Margaery walked back to the adjoining chamber where Loras rested. The maester quietly informed her that he would recover, given time. The acolyte's injury was also stabilized. Margaery sank into the chair by Loras's bedside, taking his hand in hers. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but when he opened his eyes, she felt compelled to speak softly to him. It's over, Loras, she murmured. We are free, and Cersei's plan is laid bare. The faith will not hold us any longer. She squeezed his hand. We'll go home to Highgarden, and you will heal among the fields of roses. Loras closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. I want that, he whispered, voice trembling. I want to forget this place. Margaery smoothed his brow, swallowing back her own grief. The city that had once dazzled her with promise was revealed to be more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She was done with the illusions of royal life, done with the fantasy of being a beloved queen. Now, she only wanted her family to survive and the innocent to be spared. If Cersei was to be punished for her crimes, so be it. But Margaery was not going to linger in King's Landing any longer than she had to. Word of the wildfire plot soon spread like a brushfire through the streets. The small folk whispered in awe and terror of how the city narrowly avoided a catastrophic explosion that would have killed thousands. Some credited the Seven for protecting them, while others credited the swift action of Lord Kevan Lannister. Whispers abounded that Lady Margaery Tyrell had been instrumental in discovering the plan. Those rumors thrilled some, who adored her kindness and generosity, but infuriated others, who still believed she had deceived the faith. The truth was messy, as it always was in King's Landing, but the crucial thing was that the city still stood. In the days that followed, Margaery was forced to make a few appearances. Under Kevan's watchful eye, she gave a brief statement at the Great September, now heavily guarded, where she expressed relief that the city had been delivered from a terrible fate, and she vowed her continuing devotion to the Seven. The High Sparrow stood nearby, wearing a grave expression. Margaery could see the flicker of resentment in his eyes, as though he understood he had been manipulated by Cersei and that Margaery had outmaneuvered them both. But he said nothing to undermine her. Perhaps he knew that the faith's reputation had taken a blow, and the best he could do was save face. Ser Loras was quietly released from custody, allowed to return to the Tyrell manse in King's Landing to recuperate. Margaery stayed by his side, comforting him through night terrors and supporting him when he awoke in a cold sweat. She arranged for his physical wounds to be tended by the best healers they could find. His spiritual and emotional wounds would take longer to mend, but she believed the peaceful fields of Highgarden would do more for him than any austere cell in the city. Meanwhile, Kevan Lannister wrestled with the issue of Cersei's culpability. The city was in a volatile mood, and the faith was demanding some form of reckoning. Tommen, still a boy king, was distraught over the accusations against his mother. The council debated whether Cersei should stand another trial, possibly a trial by combat. But Kevan, knowing the horrors she had nearly unleashed, struggled to ensure the matter didn't tear the realm apart. Margaery gleaned bits of the debate from the occasional conversation with Kevan or overheard talk in the halls. Some lords demanded that Cersei be locked away at once, while others, loyal to House Lannister, insisted that no direct evidence could be pinned on her. Qyburn hovered in the shadows, seemingly working to shield her from the worst repercussions. Yet the tension was undeniable, and Margaery suspected that, eventually, the pressure might break. She only hoped it would not spark further violence. As for Margaery herself, she maintained a low profile. She wished to leave King's Landing as soon as Loras could travel. Olenna Tyrell arrived from Highgarden in a furious flurry of demands, chastising the faith militant for the abuse inflicted upon her grandchildren and lambasting Cersei for her vile plot. Margaery found relief in her grandmother's presence, though she also felt a hint of embarrassment at how vulnerable she had been. Olenna took charge with characteristic determination, cornering Kevan Lannister and extracting assurances that House Tyrell would be compensated. Margaery simply kept to Loras's side, letting the unstoppable force of her grandmother do its work. In quiet moments, Margaery often reflected on how close the city had come to utter annihilation. She remembered the gloom of her cell, the drip of water, the hush of the corridors. She remembered the acolytes' urgent whispers and the moment she realized that wildfire threatened them all. If she had not acted, or if Kevan had not believed her, that same hush might have been replaced by an ear-splitting roar of green fire, obliterating everything. The cunning of Cersei Lannister knew no bounds, and that knowledge weighed heavily on Margaery's heart. Within a fortnight, Margaery decided it was time to go. Loras was strong enough to ride in a litter under heavy guard. Olenna insisted on traveling with them, determined to escort her grandchildren to the safety of Highgarden. Kevan Lannister, busy dealing with the fallout of the scandal, bid them a polite farewell at the Red Keep. He looked relieved to see them leave, Or perhaps he was simply relieved that a fraction of King's Landing's tension was departing. They rode out at dawn one clear morning, accompanied by a small retinue of Tyrell guards who had waited outside the city walls. Margaery rode in a carriage beside Loras's litter, ensuring he was comfortable, while Olenna rode in a sedan chair behind them, complaining of the morning chill and the city's stench. Margaery took one last look back at the walls of King's Landing, recalling the day she had first arrived, brimming with hope and ambition. Now she felt only a profound weariness. She was grateful to leave it behind. As they passed through the outer gates, Margaery saw small folk turning out to watch them depart. Some doffed their caps or murmured blessings, recalling the Tyrell's generosity. Others stared silently, bitterness in their eyes, perhaps blaming her for the city's recent strife. Yet the thought that overshadowed all others was that these people were still alive. The city had endured, wounded perhaps, but not reduced to ash and rubble by Cersei's vengeful plot. By midday they were on the King's Road, the city lost behind hills. Margaery felt tension seep from her shoulders with each mile. She envisioned Highgarden's warm sun and gentle breezes, the scent of roses drifting on the air. She imagined Loras slowly regaining his strength among the meadows of their home. The horrors of the September and the cells beneath it might fade, at least somewhat. Still, some nights she would probably dream of green fire. She would see that flickering haze, that vile glow that threatened to engulf everyone in an instant. She would remember how close they came to ruin. But that was the nature of King's Landing, a place where power and peril merged, where every whisper might herald betrayal. She had played the Game of Thrones and survived, for now. She had even saved the city from a monstrous act. But the scars would remain. Yet she also knew that, in the eyes of many, she had emerged as a hero of sorts, though that was not a role she had sought. She simply did what she must to protect her family and the realm. That knowledge gave her a quiet sense of resolution. If she was to be known at all, let it be for preventing tragedy, not for perpetuating the cycles of cruelty and manipulation. Perhaps, in time, that would count for something. Perhaps the realm would remember how Margaery Tyrell discovered Cersei Lannister's plan to destroy the Great September of Baelor, and stopped it. As the carriage rolled south, she stared out at the passing fields, a gentle warmth in her chest despite her lingering fatigue. One chapter of her life was closing, though she could not say what the future held. She only knew that she had stared into the fires of Cersei's hatred and refused to let them consume her. She had preserved the lives of so many, from her beloved brother to the countless strangers who prayed in the September. And as she watched the horizon stretch before her, she allowed a faint smile to curve her lips, knowing that, at least for this day, mercy and courage had prevailed over vengeance and cruelty.